In the quiet college town of Columbus, Ohio, something twisted slipped into people's lives without warning. By October 1977, 3 women had been pulled from their cars near the Ohio State University campus, driven out to Delaware County, and raped. The same man appeared in all 3 stories: long hair, dark glasses, a strange mix of accents, and a gun that never seemed to shake in his hand. Police called him the campus rapist, but his real name was William Stanley Milligan, Billy to everyone who knew him. He was 22 years old, just months out of prison after serving time for rape and armed robbery in 1975. He had been released on parole with a past already stained by violence. Internally, Billy's mind was not a single mind. To the inside world of his head, he was a whole tribe of people, each with their own name, voice, and memories. And that night, as the 3 women tried to survive, another one of those voices was in control. Billy had not always been this man. He was born in Miami Beach in 1955, his mother a singer chasing a fragile dream, his biological father a small-time entertainer who killed himself when Billy was 4. His mother remarried a man named Chalmer Milligan, and that's where the childhood darkness began. By the time he was 5, psychologists later said, Billy had already created his first 3 internal identities: a silent boy who carried the pain, a girl named Christine who kept everything polite and proper, and a boy named Sean who watched the worst of it from a distance. These weren't just moods, they were full-fledged alters, each with their own shape in his mind. Chalmer didn't just beat Billy. He tied him up in a makeshift garage shed, made him dig his own grave, and buried him up to his neck. He beat him, humiliated him, and sexually abused him repeatedly. By the time Billy was 13, he had already been hospitalized for hysterical neurosis, an early sign that his mind was splitting under pressure. He was later expelled from school for disruptive behavior and joined the Navy at 17, only to be discharged quickly because he couldn't adapt to the military structure. By the time he was arrested in 1975 for rape and armed robbery, he was already a patchwork of personalities, not a single coherent person. Years later, those same childhood fractures were driving adult crimes. By October 1977, the campus rapist was back. The first attack in 1977 felt almost small, disguised as a bad coincidence. A female optometry student left her car in the OSU Medical Center lot. A man in long hair and dark glasses appeared, flashed a gun, and walked her to the driver's seat. He didn't scream. He didn't rage. He spoke in a strangely polite way, switching between a calm, southern-sounding drawl and a more clipped, almost British tone. He made her drive to a rural area in Delaware County. He forced her to withdraw cash at an ATM, then wrote a check in her name. He told her not to go to the police, and then, as if to prove he was more than one kind of person, he bragged about a secret underground network he was part of. The second attack followed the same pattern. Another woman, alone in a parking garage, approached by a man who looked ordinary but sounded off. He didn't threaten her in a steady, angry voice. He shifted between different tones, almost like someone arguing with themselves. She noticed he called himself Billy in one moment, then seemed to switch to a more formal tone, as if someone else had taken the wheel of his voice. He made her hand over her credit cards, then dictated small withdrawals and cash, as if he were testing how much he could get from her life. The third attack came early one morning on Lane Avenue. This time, he he was more focused. He waited for a woman alone, pulled her into her own car, and drove her out to the woods. By now, he had a rhythm: kidnap, rape, rob, disappear. The Ohio State University campus was no longer a safe place. Students were scared. The police were confused. At first, the police didn't connect the attacks. But then, one of the victims recognized his face. He wasn't just any random stranger. He had a mugshot already on file as a prior sex offender. With a single fingerprint lifted from the third victim's car, Ohio authorities had their suspect. The same William Stanley Milligan who had been arrested in 1975 for rape and armed robbery. The same man who had just been released on parole months earlier. Arrested without a fight, Billy was taken to the police station. Officers expected anger, denial, maybe a confession. Instead, they got something they didn't know how to handle. In the interrogation room, he slumped, stared at the wall, and sometimes seemed to drift off in the middle of a sentence. Then he would snap back, his voice suddenly colder, sharper, in a different accent. One officer later told a newspaper that it felt like he was riding in the squad car with not one person, but several. He heard Billy speaking like a normal man one minute, then caught a British-sounding tone the next, as if someone else had taken the microphone in his head. The court ordered a psychiatric evaluation. Doctors ran IQ tests, memory checks, personality profiles. They expected shallow answers, maybe malingering. What they found was anything but simple. In one test, Billy scored in the genius range, with a high verbal IQ and strong analytical skills. In another, he fell into the intellectually disabled range, unable to read basic sentences. His handwriting changed on the page, sometimes looping neatly, sometimes jagged and childish. The psychiatrists began mapping out the alters. They didn't just count them. They watched them behave like separate people. Arthur was the first clear manager. He spoke in a stiff British accent, claiming to be in charge of who stepped forward. He was an expert on science, medicine, and even blood chemistry, calmly explaining how he organized the system of personalities. Ragen, a Yugoslavian-sounding alter, claimed responsibility for the robberies. He described himself as a communist-style Robin Hood who stole from the rich, unafraid of violence. He insisted he had taken the gun. He had forced the victims to withdraw money. He had directed the physical side of the crimes. Adalana was different. A 19-year-old woman alter, shy and lonely, who craved affection and cooked for the family inside Billy's mind. When the doctors asked her, she didn't defend herself. She said quietly that she had committed the rapes. She wanted to be seen, to be touched, to be wanted. And instead of reaching out with love, she reached out with violence. Then there were others. David, a child alter who carried the worst memories of the abuse. Tommy, a teenage boy obsessed with escape and technology, who claimed to pick locks and disappear from rooms. And even a woman named Peggy, who reported being deaf inside Billy's consciousness, and another alter with dyslexia, whose handwriting couldn't match the rest of the cluster. By the time they were done, the doctors counted no fewer than 24 distinct identities. Some were desirables, as Billy later called them, artists, thinkers, quiet helpers. Others were undesirables, petty criminals and thieves who constantly dragged the system into trouble. The case moved to trial in 1978, with the state ready to send Billy to prison for life. The charges were brutal. 3 counts of kidnapping, 3 counts of aggravated robbery, and 4 counts of rape. The prosecutors had solid evidence. One victim's identification, the other's consistent descriptions, and the fingerprint on the car. It looked like an open and shut serial rape case. But the defense team pulled out something few people had ever seen in court. They played audio recordings of the altars. On the tape, Arthur calmly explained how he controlled who came out. Ragen outlined his role in the robberies. Adalana cried as she described the rapes over and over, like a confession no one could silence. The judge, a man named David F. Crawford, listened carefully. He didn't dismiss the idea out of hand. Instead, he ordered a stabilization program. He told the doctors, "If this man cannot stand in court as one person, we cannot convict him." The psychiatrists began intensive therapy inside the Ohio State Penitentiary. They tried to make the alters talk to each other, to negotiate, to share control. They brought in medication and talk therapy, trying to build a bridge between the buried boy and the violent adults that had grown from his pain. After months of work, the doctors reached a conclusion. They said Billy did not have the ability to control when an alter took over. They said he genuinely could not remember the crimes. The man who signed papers in court was not the man who drove the victims into the woods. So on December 4th, 1978, the judge made American legal history. He found Billy Milligan not guilty by reason of insanity. The courtroom reacted in shock. The victims sat in silence, their bodies remembering what their attacker could not. The press rushed out headlines about a man with 24 personalities who had walked away from a rape case on a technicality of the mind. The doctors didn't say he was cured. They said he was fragmented. They said sending him to prison would be like punishing someone for a nightmare they didn't choose to dream. Billy was sent instead to a psychiatric hospital in Athens, Ohio, under the state's custody. He spent years bouncing between facilities, sometimes released to the public, sometimes re-hospitalized, sometimes re-incarcerated for new crimes. At one point in the 1980s, he attacked a woman in a bar in Columbus, assaulting her and then fleeing. He was charged again, this time with kidnapping and assault. The court argued once more about his mental state, and once again the case was tangled in the same question. Who is Billy Milligan, and who is responsible for what he does? Over time, the case became a textbook example in psychology and law. It helped push the American legal system to recognize dissociative identity disorder as a real, if rare, diagnosis. It also sparked a fierce debate about whether someone can truly be not guilty when their body commits violence. Some experts still believe Billy was faking. They point out that he read psychology books in prison, that he studied the idea of multiple personalities, that he watched movies about split minds. They argue he created a very convincing show, using the language of psychiatry to protect himself. Others stand by the diagnosis. They say severe, repeated childhood abuse can fracture the mind in ways that look exactly like what the doctors described. They say the fact that the alters had different accents, disabilities like deafness and dyslexia, and even different talents, artists, scientists, criminals, makes it unlikely all of that was simply acted. Billy himself gave interviews later in life in which he claimed he was both ill and misunderstood. He spoke softly about wanting to be seen as more than a monster. He talked about the day he realized his own mind was a house filled with strangers. He died in 2014 at the age of 60 in a care home of cancer. His story was restaged for a Netflix documentary called Monsters Inside, The 24 Faces of Billy Milligan. And for a time, his name returned to the public eye. The story is not just about a man who raped women. It's about a boy who was buried up to his neck in his own yard and survived by pretending it was happening to someone else. It's about a mind that learned to split so deeply that it became a community of 24 people, each forced to carry a piece of the trauma. Psychologists now know that dissociative identity disorder almost always appears after extreme, repeated childhood abuse. The brain's job is to survive, not to be honest. It will hide memories, rewrite identities, and build walls around unbearable pain. In Billy's case, those walls turned into full-fledged people. Some were gentle, artistic, quiet. Others were violent, manipulative, desperate. If someone's mind is truly broken into pieces, who is the self that deserves punishment? The body that moves and rapes despite the fragmented mind? Or only that part of the brain able to consciously choose? Billy Milligan's case still lives in the tension between those two questions. And as long as fear, abuse, and secrets keep hiding in ordinary homes, the same kind of darkness may be waiting inside other people we never suspect. Because in the end, Billy wasn't just a case file or a headline. He was a reminder that behind some of the most extreme crimes, there is often a shattered childhood no one managed to fix in time.